What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. We're here for another Talkin Tackle, and I got the little guy with me. But anyway, guys, let's just get into it because I know y'all are gonna love this one. In tonight's Talkin Tackle, the tackle that we're gonna be talking about is topwaters, and tonight's special guest is gonna be Bass Fishing HQ himself, Mr. Tyler Berger. So let's get into it. Here we go. There we go. All right. What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. All right. So it is another Talkin Tackle, and the Tyler that we have, the guest that we have is Mr. Tyler Berger. And let me tell you, really, I'm actually pretty honored that you're coming on the show because I've watched a lot of your videos and I've learned a ton from you specifically. So to actually have you come on the channel was kind of like, you know, you have like a goal list. It was one of those things that I was like, cool, man, I actually get to talk to this guy. So I really appreciate you coming on. If you don't mind, just kind of introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, I'm Tyler Berger. My channel is Bass Fishing HQ, whether you've seen it or not. Maybe this is your first time even hearing about it. So go over there and check it out if you want. But, you know, I just do educational bass fishing videos. I just try to make them engaging. I try to make them a little bit entertaining. I try to make them a little bit outside of the norm if I can. But that's all I try to do, you know, and I try to stay positive a lot on the channel. I feel like there's some grumpy old men that are in the bass fishing world, and it's
Definitely.
just, I'm not a negative person in general. And so like, I try to stay positive with it all. I mean, it's fishing at the end of the day, we're talking about fishing, and it's like, there's nothing that can replace that feeling of catching a fish, whether it's your first fish, whether it's your 1,000th fish, like you still get all excited about it. And so that's, you know, I've always fished. I love to fish, and that's just me. So
there you go. Like I said, and that's one of those things I do admire about you, truthfully, is the positive vibes. I feel like you really do always kind of have an upbeat, kind of happy vibe to your channel. And I like that. Plus, I like educational. That's kind of where I like to go with this actual Talkin Tackle. It started with just me. And then I was like, you know, I'm not the most, I don't know the most, you know what I mean, when it comes to fishing. So I really was trying to get more guests on the show and get what they like, their knowledge that they have on specific things, and just go in depth with it. And that seems to just kind of be taken off. And I'm really loving it because I'm learning a ton. And for anybody who doesn't know yet, if you haven't already, you know, because I'm sure with the title, I'll let you know what it is. But in this video, we're going to be talking about topwaters. So what's your favorite topwater? Why topwater? What is it about topwaters that just gets you going?
Ooh, I mean, I think that for everyone, probably yourself included, you know, some of your first topwater bites, like you probably still remember.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, everyone, you know, loves that explosion of a bass, but I really like topwaters because I have fished a ton of tournaments. Like that's kind of my background, is fishing a lot of tournaments. So whether you like fishing tournaments or not, topwater is a great way to go out and catch a big bass. And so, you know, in a tournament situation, to be able to catch bigger than average bass really helps. Obviously, that's how you do better in a tournament situation. So that's why I've kind of always liked topwater. I think a lot of tournament fishermen don't always love topwaters because if you don't have the right kind of, you know, rods, reel setup, it hooks, everything, I do think you can lose a lot of fish on a topwater. And even if you have everything perfect, you're still going to lose some fish from time to time. That's just the way it is. But at the end of the day, topwaters can get some really big bites. It gets your heart going.
Yeah.
And that's why I love it, you know? So it's what I actually, way back in the day, like forever ago, I thought about starting a channel called Topwater Tyler, but
so is it like one of your primary things that you fish? I mean, because, you know, you've put so many different videos out there that kind of really cover the full kind of spectrum, but what is it, you know, do you fish topwater like majority of the time, would you say?
I wouldn't say the majority. I fish as often as I can.
There you go. Okay.
Like I said, a bit, you know, during the summer, you know, especially during the summer, I will always have one tied up, whether it's a popper, a spook, a whopper plopper. I mean, there's so many, you know, great baits out there, topwater baits, I almost always have them. But pretty much from the time that water hits about 50 degrees
Okay.
and above, depending on where you live in the country, like you can catch fish on topwaters, and so I wouldn't say the majority of the time, but I would say every time that I'm in the boat, I have one at least tied up. Whether I'm throwing it or not, is a different story.
Right. You got to like feel the options out.
Yeah. I always force it probably more than I should, but a lot of times in the summer, I mean, it's hard to beat it at times. Like
Definitely.
I said, I still fish a ton of tournaments, and there are times where I'll throw nothing but it because I know if I get 3, 4, 5 bites on it, they're going to be good ones. So,
and they're going to be big, especially if you can hook them up.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
What's your favorite topwater as far as like, is it the whopper plopper? Is it the frog? Is there a favorite?
Yeah. So I actually was just talking about this not too long ago. And my favorite is actually one that I think people like overlook most of the time now. And that's a popper, just like your traditional popper. And I think that, when you first start getting into bass fishing, you probably buy a popper, you probably catch fish on a popper, but as you kind of gain more knowledge and just fish a lot more, you pick up the whopper ploppers and you pick up the spooks and the buzz baits and the frogs and everything. And it almost is like the popper kind of goes on the back burner, or I think sometimes people associate a popper with just pond fishing. And although it is a phenomenal pond fishing bait, like I use it a lot of times in some really big lakes, and I don't just use it to target fish, and I don't just fish it really slow. I fish it most of the time I fish it, I'm fishing it pretty fast. And so I will cover a lot of water with a popper and catch a lot of fish, and I fish for a lot of smallmouth, some of the lakes that are close to me. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times I like a popper more than like a spook style bait, because if you fish for smallmouth, I mean, sometimes they just come up there and they'll hit that bait and they'll blow it way out of the water, whether that's a spook or something. But that popper, with it having kind of that smaller presence, like you tend to hook up with more of them. And
because they tend to want to, the profile itself just tends to be more attractive.
Yeah, it's a little bit smaller.
Right.
And obviously, like, smallmouth do actually have smaller mouths. Like,
right.
And so, like, you have a 4 or 5 pound smallmouth, it's going to have a mouth about the size of a 2 pound largemouth, if not a little smaller.
Isn't that crazy? I would love to get on smallmouth. I've never caught smallmouth. It is a goal of mine. But see, the thing is here in Georgia, there's a bass slam, because we have so many species here in the state itself, and you have to catch like 5 of the 10 that are here that are qualified. And smallmouth is one of them, but there's like a tiny spot on the map in Georgia where smallmouth are. So it's like a 4 or 5 hour trip from where I am. And so it's like, if I don't catch it, it's like a long trip back, and it's a plan. It's like a whole thing I have to like plan out. But I do want to go out there and try to get some smallmouth, because they seem like they're really exciting to catch. I'd love to get on them one day.
Yeah, absolutely. They really are. I mean, Georgia, I know, has a lot of spotted bass too.
Yeah.
And, they're kind of in that vein of just crazy fish.
Yeah, they fight, right?
They fight, and smallmouth, they may not pull. Like, I feel like I've caught a lot of largemouth that physically pull harder, but smallmouth just do not give up.
They keep going.
You'll fight them and they kind of give up, where they just kind of go up on their side. And it's like, that does not happen with a smallmouth. Like, no matter what rod and reel equipment you're using, like they do not give up. They do this thing where they dig down, and it's like, I fish a lot, like I said, a lot.
Oh, you froze on me. I wonder if you'll come back. Your camera, there it goes. You froze on me for a second. Sorry.
Okay.
And it's probably because of my internet. I don't know why. Sometimes I guess I might need to start doing these inside or something, because my internet connection says it's unstable out here, which it shouldn't be. But I'm trying to remember where I caught you at. Go for it.
I was just gonna say, the smallmouth, they dig so much, and when they dig in, it's just hard to get them. But it is a lot of fun. It is something that, it's hard to make a 4 or 5 hour trip where exactly in Georgia, like south, north, east, west?
I'm central? I have a hard time with my directions. I'm like southwest kind of, or no, I'm sorry. See, I'm dyslexic too. So I totally did it the other way. So I'm actually north
Northeast.
Kind of Atlanta, I think. Now you got me wondering. I'm
I'm not
terrible about
exactly
this.
sure. Well, I know that Georgia is a humongous state because every time I go down to Florida, often, and if I go down 75, like you're in Georgia for half the trip.
Like Northeast, I know Georgia's a big state. It
is.
feels
So,
like,
and Georgia has a lot, better overall fishing in it than a place like Ohio. Like I often will make a 2-4 hour trip, go up to St. Clair just to get away from what I fish by. But in Georgia, like you got a lot of probably closer bodies of water where you can just go and have fun.
I got a bunch of little ponds, and that's one of a ton of little ponds around here. It's one of those benefits. And when I got into fishing, I didn't realize, I've said this in other videos, I didn't realize how like lucky I am to be in Georgia for fishing. You know what I mean? Like it was just one of those, I picked it up as a hobby, and then I realized everybody's like, oh, you're in Georgia. Of course you're catching big bass. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was like a thing, like, but I don't catch them big all the time, but they do. The record was here in Georgia. And I mean, we're known to have big bass, but you look at Texas, and to me, I feel like the next record's going to come out of Texas with the way they're pulling them out nowadays. But yeah, I didn't realize how good the fishing was here until everybody started telling me about it. And I was like, well, I'm glad that I like fishing then, you know what I mean? Like I said, one thing I wish we had more of was smallmouth. But there's a place here. I have to just go to it and get it on it,
Yeah. Well, it'll be a good time, I'm sure, when you do.
Yeah. I'm ready for it. I got to figure it out. I got to get a buddy that has a boat or something to get out on there, but we can get back on Topwater. Speaking of, I know I'm sitting here like, okay, what were we talking about? I'm ADHD, by the way. So as far as like the rod reel, you were saying earlier that a lot of people mess up because they may not have the right setup in a sense, basically. And that's why a lot of people kind of stray away from it. So what is the right kind of setup that you would say would be to keep people on a topwater bite?
Yeah. So I think, one of the biggest things that you can do to help yourselves with just catching more fish that get hooked up on a topwater is just make sure that you're fishing, kind of that medium power rod, and one that is more of a parabolic bending action. So a lot of times it's going to be labeled as moderate on a rod, maybe even sometimes you'll see regular on some rods. So that moderate, that parabolic bending action, like I'm a firm believer that if you have that in a rod, especially when you're fishing a treble hooked lure, so not just topwaters, but crankbaits, if you have that, it really does help to keep those fish pinned, and keep that hook in. If you have a rod that is a little bit too stiff, or even if the tip, you have a lot of rods that are kind of considered like an 80-20 rod, where like the top 20%, that's like your fast action rod.
The faster ones.
The top 20% is going to bend, the lower 80 doesn't. And what happens is a fish is going to come up and jump, and that bend will, because it's only bending at the top, it'll flex all the way out. And now that fish is swinging its head on a slack line, and it can easily throw that bait, because a lot of topwaters are fairly heavy, spooks, whopper ploppers, they're heavy baits. So the heavier a bait is, the easier it is for a bass to kind of throw it.
Right. They have it to their advantage.
Yeah, and if you have that rod that bends, kind of all the way through, if that fish jumps, it's going to recoil, but not as much. It's going to keep pressure on that hook that's in that mouth, and that's what's going to help you to land more fish. And the best way to actually see this is, back in the day, I used to use a rod that was a crankbait rod, but it was more of that fast action rod. And if I, made a bad cast, because we all do it, into a tree, I could rip that thing out of there, no problem. But as soon as I started fishing with a more parabolic bending rod, same thing. You launch it into a tree, you struggle to kind of get that thing out
because of the actual bend.
And so that is where you really that is probably the biggest thing that you can do with a topwater. And it's whether you fish it on a bait caster or a spinning rod, because you can you can fish most topwaters on both. I fish a popper mostly on a bait caster, but a lot of people might want to throw it on a spinning rod because it tends to be a lighter bait. And the bigger your topwaters are, the better a bait caster will handle it. But you could probably get away with a spinning rod because there are people who are just spinning rod
people. Right. I was actually going to ask that what your preference was as far as what you preferred to throw it on. And because I mean, you have different people who prefer different styles. But yeah, I'm definitely all about bait casters, but if it calls for it, I'll definitely throw it on a spinning combo. I'm not the most confident with whopper ploppers and topwater in general. And I don't know, I've caught my first PB, which to me now, I mean, I've caught an almost 6-pounder, but it was a 3-pounder at the time. And it was like my first one where I felt like I was catching a decent sized fish. And I actually caught it on a frog. And it was an H2O Express one that I got from Academy. I got like the whole combo and everything. And it's exhilarating, but I caught it on a frog. I'm not the most confident with like whopper ploppers and spooks yet, but they definitely are intriguing. I want to, I don't know why. I just need to throw them more. I feel like I don't really have a good excuse on it.
Well, I think, you know, you're like anyone, you know, myself included, you know, there's so many different types of lures out there. I mean, when we say top waters, you know, there's probably 6 or 7 like different types,
right.
You know, and so like you get confidence in one, like a frog. And, you know, especially if you're fishing in a lot of pond situations where you might be dealing with scum of some sort or grass of some sort. I mean, a frog's going to be the best, you know, option for that. And so like, you just don't even think about it. Like to throw, you know, I did a video here recently on fishing swim baits, like a mag draft, you know, a mega bass mag draft.
Big ones.
One of my favorite, you know, lures to fish in ponds and lakes everywhere. And the thing is that people just don't think to pick it up. You know, they're going to throw a chatterbait or spinner bait or even a jerk bait in a lot of those same situations where if they just think to throw a top or a mag draft, then they would catch fish on it. And it's the same thing with the top water. You know, like you might not have a lot of confidence in a spook and a whopper plopper, but I'm sure you probably only picked them up a few times. And it's like, it only takes that one fish sometimes.
That's true.
To just feel like, oh, I get that. And then you catch another one that's bam, more confident.
Get that confidence. Yeah.
So it really is like, I just love top waters because, you know, like you just said, you know, your first like PB, your first one of your better size fish was on a top water, you know, and so it makes sense. And, you know, I should have mentioned that, you know, when I was talking about the rod earlier anytime I'm talking about that parabolic bend, it's really for treble hooked top waters, like a spook and you know, the popper and even a whopper plopper. I'll throw on more of a parabolic bending action. But if you're throwing, you know, a frog or you're throwing a buzz bait, you know, those are rods that you can use that faster action rod with because you don't need
it's not a treble hook. It's kind of a different, I mean, that makes sense. I didn't even really think about it like that, but that, I mean, it makes sense with hooks. I mean, with frogs, they have that double. And with those, I've never even tried pulling my hook up a little bit. I know everybody talks about doing that. So I'm actually going to try that more this year when the time comes. We got to get into the summertime. How long is the rod that you would think would be the best, you know, sweet spot length?
So lengthwise, I really like a 7-foot 2-inch rod. And I like that for a number of different techniques, not just top water. I think it's just a very good all around technique, you know? So if you're first starting in bass fishing, it can feel a little long at times, but it's not, you know, and, you know, especially if like I have some 8-foot rods that I use. A lot of 7.
And when you start really getting into it, you understand that 7.2 is about regular size. It's one of those normal sizes.
Yeah, no, and to me, it's a perfect all around rod. Like if I could have one rod, it's going to be in that 7.2, 7.3 length. And the same thing with the top waters. You know, with top waters, there's sometimes when you're going to be casting a top water over a flat, and there's times where you're going to be casting it up underneath of an overhanging tree. You know, so if I was just fishing a topwater on flats, I might go up to a longer rod. But then again, you're working a bait a lot like a topwater, where that longer rod just has a little bit more leverage on your wrist, which kind of hurts over time.
Yeah, it can wear you out.
Yeah, it can. And then the shorter rods allow you to typically be a little bit more accurate. You know, once you get really comfortable, like you said, you love bait casters. So, you know, a difference between a 6.9 and a 7.2, accuracy, you're probably just fine either one, you know, but for a
Right.
lot of people who may be just getting started, those shorter rods tend to just be a little bit easier to manage and allow you to be a little bit more accurate. So
Yeah.
overall though, a 7.2, it kind of hits on both sides of being that perfect overall rod that I really like. So, and I actually used to use, like, the rods that I use now. I actually have some sitting right next to me.
Yeah, bring it out. Let's see it. I'm all for it. I don't have a whole lot of the I mean, I have some. I just, you know, like I said, I'm not the most confident, and I have a sorry, my phone just like buzzed. I'm so ADHD sometimes. I'm sorry. But I do have a lot of top water. I have a lot of frogs and stuff like that too. I like I said, I'm in a whole nother seat. So like I'm used to having all my stuff like right here, and it's like over here now.
But I mean, as far as the setup goes, like this, so I used to use glass rods or fiberglass or even composite rods at times because they have that true parabolic bend. But the thing about that composite or even glass rod is it's a little bit heavier than like a graphite rod, you know? And so it is just like we talked about, if you're working a top water, whether it's a popper or
over time,
a spook, like it just wears on you. Like you don't think about it until you do it for an hour or for a day. Then you're like, oh man, like I can feel it in my wrist and stuff. And so this rod is one of my favorites. It's newer. It's the Invoker Pro by Arc.
Nice.
This is, like I said, it actually says, you know, action is a regular action. Another thing we haven't really talked about is I use braid. So I use braid on all my top waters, and I connect that braid to a small, like, monofilament leader.
Okay.
So, and
how long?
It's very, you know, you don't want it too long. Let me bring it around here.
Yeah.
But this is like, my hand's just
that's tiny. 2 feet maybe?
It's probably at most about 2 foot.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the reason being is I tend to use a heavier monofilament leader. Like this is actually 20-pound test.
Wow.
And so the reason being is that 20-pound test is a little bit thicker. It's a little bit more of a taut line. And so it doesn't tend to like get wrapped up in your treble hooks like if you're using straight braid, you know. Straight braid it can be good, but sometimes you will make the longest cast out there with straight braid, and that line will get hung around that first
in the air,
and then it fouls up that entire cast. And of course,
you're all screwed up.
Yeah,
and then all the fish coming back.
And so that's a big reason that I use the monofilament leader. The other reason is it does give you just that little extra give, you know, because, you know, with monofilament, you do have stretch there, you know, and braid has no stretch.
None.
Now, the reason I like to use braid for the main line is I can make a long cast out there. And if a fish hits me on the end of a long cast, which they do a lot with top waters, you don't really have to they pretty much almost set.
They do it because the way they attack it.
They hit it so hard. You have straight braid, which is mostly no stretch, and all you do is just lean into them, and you got them. You know, and I've used, you know, straight monofilament before, and made those long bomb casts, and mono stretches pretty good. And so, if a fish hits you out there, you set the hook like you won't get as good of a hook because that line over a 30-yard stretch might stretch out 4 foot. You know,
it's almost like to the fish's benefit almost.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And so that's why I really like the straight braid. Now, some people just want to use monofilament, and that's absolutely fine. And if you do that, my big suggestion is make sure you use a little bit stiffer of a rod. I'm not talking about a broomstick. You might want to use a medium heavy. You still want to use that kind of parabolic action, but you want one that's a little bit stiffer to kind of help you drive those hooks at a distance.
Yeah, that makes sense.
No, it's going to be all the give that you need. So
sorry, I was just going to say that's good to advise, because a lot of the times with beginners, especially, they tend to be when you first start fishing, I feel like braid's almost kind of scary to like even think about getting involved with. Like there was a point in life where I was like, there's no way I'm never even going to touch braid. And then now like it's my backing, it's what I use for top waters and things like that. So it's like a matter of experience, maybe, I guess, when you feel more comfortable with it. But there's definitely, I feel like most beginners are advised to use monofilament. So you got a lot of beginners who are out there and that's all they use. So it's definitely good to have. I mean, that the advice with that is awesome. I appreciate that. And that, I feel like your little trick there with the mono leader could almost be the difference between a good and a bad day with throwing a top water, because of the matter of, like you said, it getting all caught up and things like that with straight blade. You know, if somebody tries that little trick, you know, maybe you'll have a better day out there actually trying it. I'm going to try it now because I've learned a lot from you. So I wouldn't, you know, I feel like that's something I'm going to try when I try my top water next time.
Yeah. The big thing with the leader is that you definitely, like, 2 foot is probably the maximum. I try to keep the knot out of my guides when it comes to that. So, like, you know, if I'm using a spinning rod, I use a lot of braid to fluorocarbon leaders. And I don't mind having a 12 foot, you know, 15 foot leader. But with the top water, with it, you know, with it being a little bit thicker line that I'm using being that 20, I want to keep that knot out of my guide. So when I go to cast it, I might have 2.5 foot off the end of my rod to make a long cast. And I want that knot outside. So if you have a 3 or 4 foot leader, you know, sometimes it doesn't matter, but sometimes it'll hit the guide just right. It could pop out the insert or whatever. So, and I've used, like, I don't think you can go too small. Like, I've used, like, you know, you start with 2 foot and you have a fish hit it and it brings you into some zebra mussels or under a piece of wood. You cut it. By the time you're fishing it, it's 6 inches long, you know, and that's fine, you know, just because, again, I want it really to keep that braid out of that first treble, because that can just be, like you said, so frustrating.
It could be like a make or break for a good day. You know what I mean? And like I said, I don't have the most experience at all with a whole. I mean, I have some experience with frogs, but as far as, like I said, the other kinds of top waters, I don't have the most experience. So like that could be, I feel like that's a great little tip. That's what I like about these videos, honestly, because it, you know, and get other people's, you know, thoughts and views and, you know, what you've had, because you have a ton of experience, in my opinion. You know, you're a tournament angler, so you have a mindset of, you know, the whole point is to kind of catch fish, and to have those little tidbits are going to be great for people who want to try different things, you know? So
at the end of the day, whether you fish tournaments or whether you just fish for fun, like, you want to hook every fish that you land. You want to have a good experience, you know, and that's the same mindset for tournament fishermen and, you know, an angler who either is just getting started or even if they're experienced and they just, you know, want to go out fun fishing. Like, you want to hook the fish that land, because you never know when it's going to be a 6, 7, 8, 10 pounder. So, and I want to catch that fish. That's for sure.
So what kind of reel speed are you using? What's your ideal, like, sweet spot for that when it comes to the top water?
So anything kind of in the 7 range. So, you know, all the reel brands are a little bit different, whether it's a 7.1 to 1 or 7.6 to 1. You know, I think that this is a 7.3 to 1 is this reel here. So I would say that is actually the slowest you would want to go.
Okay.
You could go faster. And the reason being, you know, and this is a little bit more situational, but sometimes when you are fishing top waters, it's because you're fishing around schooling fish, you know? So a lot of times in that situation, you want to rip, like, you might see a fish bust over here and your lure's over there. So being able to pick that line up, whether it's 20 yards out or whatever, and make that cast quick. There's a big difference between if you have like a 6.3 to 1 and a 7.3 or an 8.3. You know, you can pick up that line a lot quicker in literally seconds. You know, you might be able to get that bait over to that fish that's busting and catch it. You know, where sometimes if you're too slow and that fish is down, it's done.
That whole school's gone, you know?
Yeah. So that's kind of the sweet spot. You know, if you fish a lot of ponds, you even run into schooling fish at times, you know, so it's the same situation. But am I saying that you can't get away with a 6? No, like, you can absolutely do that. I've done it before. Like, you know, I understand that a lot of people don't always have budgets. You know, they don't always like a big budget. Don't
have budgets. No budget would be nice.
Yeah, that would be nice. They don't have a big budget, and so they can't just spend money on an extra reel or rods. You know, they're not like us where we're just love every minute of it and want to have a technique specific.
Figure out how to have it somehow, right?
Yeah.
I don't even, you know.
So I think, in general, a 7 gear ratio reel in that 7 range is pretty good for most techniques that you're going to use.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like the 7, just like we were talking about with 7.2, a 7.2 is one of those sweet spots. I feel like somewhere as far as the rod, and then a 7 gear ratio, somewhere in there is a good sweet spot too. Most of my reels, I think I have I have one high speed that's an 8-1-1, and then I also have one or two that is in like in the 6 range, but all my other ones are somewhere in that 7 range. And that's just like you said, you can apply some sort of 7 speed to almost every technique in fishing, I feel like. And especially with bass fishing, I guess I don't have a whole lot of other experience with other fish besides largemouth and like some crappie and bluegill, but that's about it. I'm hoping to change that some more this year. That's, one of those goals that I have in mind. But I just got a puppy and life's been crazy. So it's kind of like, oh, maybe not. Maybe it won't be this year. Maybe it'll be next year. But, it's always the adventure of figuring out what's coming next. So let me think, what's the best kind of weight? So like how heavy, how light, what's the setting that changes the weight for you? What like makes you throw a certain weight here, but then you'll throw it a different weight somewhere else? If that makes any sense.
When you're talking about weight, what exactly do you like as far as top waters? What do you mean? Like the weight of the lure?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's really going to be a match the hatch type of deal.
Okay.
So if you're fishing in, ponds that maybe have, this is another thing. Cause I fished in ponds that have really small bluegill that bass eat. I fished in ponds that have really big bluegill that the bass eat. And those tend to be the ponds that have big bass in them too. So if I'm fishing in a pond that I think those fish are bigger, like I tend to use a bigger bait. I think it is true that bigger baits will catch bigger fish at times. Now that's not always true, but a lot of times it does come down to kind of matching the hatch. Now, one thing, for lake fishermen, something that I always do a lot, at the end of the year, usually like September, October, you have a lot of the bait fish that are in these lakes, even like bluegill, but like shad, gizzard shad, threadfin shad, they have all had their spawns, and a lot of the bait fish are like this small across the entire system. Wow. So in a lot of those situations, I'm going to use a smaller bait. Now that could be a smaller like spook style topwater, but again, that's actually when I go to using that popper a lot, because again, it's a smaller presence a lot. So that's kind of like what I like to do. I tend to throw the biggest topwaters of the year right after the bass spawn.
Okay. So coming up.
So coming up, right after they're done spawning, I think that is a time where bass are looking for a big meal. There's sometimes can be like a lull, like where basically what happens is the females come off the beds, and I think the lull is basically when they're kind of moving to the next area that they're going to kind of hang to feed up. Because male bass and female bass, they don't eat a whole lot while they're spawning, especially the males. Because males are first, they come up to make the bed, they usher in the female comes up, lays the eggs, leaves, and then the male sits there, guards the eggs until they hatch, and then guards that fry. So the male will go a long time without eating. And so, but after that, after they kind of, the fry has hatched and the females get to where they're going to go, I think that's one of the best times to throw that big topwater bait. So a lot of times, like I'm going to pick up like a bigger spook style bait in those situations. And I'm not talking about like massive, like, it's just like, this is like one of those IMA walking
like 5 or 6 inch. Was that 5 or 6 maybe? Yeah.
Yep, about 5 or 6. It's not huge, but it has a pretty big presence in the water. When you cast it out, and you're bringing this thing, like it's like I said, it's a big presence out there. And so that's what I think, that post spawn time frame, that's one of the best times to throw this. And then you can throw it, throughout the summer, and then late summer I tend to go a little bit smaller, like I said, because of the bait. All the bait fish are a little bit smaller. And then in the fall is kind of a crap. Like, it can be anything.
You never know.
Anything goes in the fall. Like, I think that a lot of people have the misconception that a lot of bass are going to be for lake fishermen in the back of a creek, but even in a pond fisherman, in a pond mindset, like you feel like the fish are going to start feeding up and you should be catching them, but the fall can be very difficult in a pond, in a lake. It can be very difficult.
Well,
and it's like, whatever you catch them on, and just keep on going.
Yeah, that's when you're doing the junk fishing. That's when junk fishing tends to be at its prime in there. And now
Absolutely.
it's, is it maybe because they tend to have it's not always, but they can have a second spawn, right? In the fall?
Yeah, down south. So like southern Georgia, Florida, probably Texas. I don't know in Texas for sure, but I know for a fact in Florida, because when that weather gets colder is actually when the bass spawn. Pretty much everywhere else in the country, when the weather starts to get warmer is when the bass spawn. But when bass spawn in Florida, it's been 90, 100 degrees.
Right. You got to get in the sweet spot.
Yeah. And so you will have a fall spawn during the summer or during the like November, December down in Florida. It doesn't really happen a lot of other places that I know about.
Okay.
But the big thing that makes fall fishing hard and why it's junk fishing is that the fish are just 100% spread out. In the spring, you kind of know where they're going. And then once they go there, you kind of know where they're going to go after that. And in the summer, it's more or less like they have pods of fish here, pods of fish there. But in the fall, like we talked about, there's bait fish everywhere. There's bait fish in the back of a creek. There's bait fish on the main lake. There's bait fish all over. And so the bass are all over. And not only that, they can be in a lot of different water columns. Something that happens in the late summer period in lakes and even in ponds, because I used to swim in my parents' pond that I grew up on, and you would have a thermocline.
Yeah, the flip.
It would flip. I would be swimming in late summer. Your feet would be frozen, but the rest of your body's super warm because that was the thermocline. And those bass typically will hold right where that thermocline is or above it because of the oxygen. Now in the fall, you have the turnover, and that turnover makes bass fishing hard because it kind of depletes the oxygen across the lake, but it also spreads the fish out because now they don't have to be in just that top layer. They can be throughout the entire system.
Yeah, it's mixed more, right? It's more like the whole is it that, so like while it's flipping essentially is what you're saying is right, it's like the same temperature throughout.
Yeah.
So it's like and then when you get in the wintertime, it flips. The warmer part's down at the bottom and then the colder part's up top, right?
Yeah. So that's the thing is that so in the fall, it completely spreads fish out. They don't really group up until later fall. And that's why it's so difficult at times because you might catch fish in 30 foot of water one day, a foot of water the next day on completely different baits.
That's so deep for me.
Yeah.
Like when I think about that, I mean, it's just like it'll be the day that I can sit there and be like, yeah, I'm used to fishing, deeper than, God, I don't know, some of the deeper waters I've maybe fished, or I've fished deep. I've fished lakes before, but as far as like on the regular, the ponds around here are maybe 10 feet. You know what I mean? So when people start talking about fishing 30 foot of water, I'm like, can you really catch bass that deep? Like I know for smallmouth, right? For sure. Yeah. Smallmouth definitely ride deeper as far as what I've learned. But I've heard that largemouth don't tend to ride as deep. Is that true? I'm not sure. You're the lake guy.
It is 100% dependent on the lake. So most lakes, like you're not going to find real deep largemouth, but there are lakes, like I fished this random lake in a tournament that was in Virginia called Philpott Lake. No one's probably ever heard of this lake.
Yeah.
But yeah. And we fished it in the middle of summer, and I had found several schools of bass that were in between 30 and 40 foot of water, and they were mixed largemouth and smallmouth.
Wow.
So there was a ton of largemouth that were really deep there. And it's just for whatever, that was more of a mountain-esque lake. So it was deeper in general. So lakes that are like on the average deeper, I think those fish
they'll ride deeper.
They'll ride deeper. And, but lakes that aren't that way, they don't necessarily need to. And it's, if that lake also didn't have a tremendous amount of shoreline cover, it was pretty barren. So there was nothing to kind of hold those fish shallow. Some lakes that you have docks on, or they
Mm-hmm.
have grass, or they have a lot of brush or rock, those fish have something to kind of hold on and be around. But if they don't have that, then they have nothing else to do but be really deep. So,
Right.
I think it's very dependent. I know that there are lakes out in the West that people have caught fish. I think that a lot of these were spotted bass, but I remember hearing stories of like Aaron Martin's catching fish on drop shot in 120 foot of water.
Catching
And
largemouth?
I think they were spots, but
Oh,
I'm
okay. I
not
was
sure.
like, whoa, like I've
Yeah.
never heard of largemouth being that
Yeah.
deep. I mean, that's really deep though.
Yeah.
And you said you were talking about you said that they were riding together, smallmouth and largemouth. Now, is that typical? I know this is kind of off subject with topwater. And this is just my curiosity with smallmouth. How different to me, that's my curiosity. How different are the patterns with smallmouth and largemouth? Are they similar? Do they ride together? I know they're different, but are there
Yeah.
times of the year, I guess, where they ride together?
I think again, it depends on the lake a little bit, because
Okay.
so I have a lake that's near me that I fish often, and we use completely different patterns to catch smallmouth than the largemouth. Every
Okay.
now and then you will catch a largemouth fishing in a smallmouth area that tends to be like a deeper rocky area. But for the most part, they're kind of doing separate things. Now, with that being said, there are areas across the country like that I have fished in New York, and
That's cool.
where it's like if you can actually find the areas where you are catching largemouth and smallmouth, those tend to be like the best areas in the lake.
Huh.
So if you have, and I think it really comes down to the bait. If there's the right bait in the area that is attracting both largemouth and smallmouth, that is where you can really like catch a lot of fish and some big fish. My buddy actually just got done fishing Cherokee Lake and the Bassmaster Open that happened like a week ago. And
Okay.
he found an area that he had like 16 pounds the first day, was sitting in like 20th place, like doing really well in the tournament. But he found one of those type of areas where it was largemouth, it was smallmouth, and it was stripers. And they were
Oh,
all in the same area. And he was just catching a lot of them. And the big thing was there was the right type of bait and the
yeah.
right size bait was in that area. And that's where he was catching them. And so I think that there are times in lakes where they ride together, and then there's lakes where it's a separate deal.
Okay.
So,
That's interesting. See, I don't know. I'm trying to learn more about smallmouth, even though I've never caught them. So,
yeah.
um, okay. So let's see. So as far you've kind of made it. So, do you go with match the hatch colors? I was trying to get that out. Like, do you go with certain colors? Because you were talking about match the hatch earlier. So, do you go with those patterns, or what are your favorite colors and patterns that are easy best used on specific days too, like on clearer days and clearer water, or muddier days and murkier weather?
Yeah, so when it comes to colors, especially in a topwater bait, I am very simple. And I'm very
Okay.
simple with a lot of the colors that I choose in general, because I kind of feel like in bass fishing, there's like an 80-20 rule, like you have in business. And I think in fishing, it's even probably like a 90-10 rule, where about 90% of the time, not, for instance, 90% of the time, green pumpkin is probably going to catch them, right?
Yeah.
There's
Right.
10% of the time where watermelon, red flake will catch them better, and that's what keeps us always like, oh, that's why I want this color and this color.
Right.
But most of
Right.
the time, if you're green pumpkin and black and blue, like you're good to go as far as soft plastics with those colors. Now, topwater, I kind of have a very similar mindset, because one, if you think about it, bass are only seeing the bottom side of the
Mm-hmm.
topwater anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, I'm going to have probably the one that I fish the most, especially in clear water, is a translucent type color, one
Okay.
that you kind of see through. So this bait, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it on the work it.
Come off. Come on. Come on.
So like, you
Oh
can
yeah,
see
I can see your eyeball through it.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So that's
That'll be a good thumbnail right there.
yeah, there you go. But anyways, the translucent baits I use most of the time in clear water, because you don't want to give that bass a really good look at that bait. Like, you want them to kind of hear it and be like, what is that? And then they'll go up there and snatch it. So That's the one I use a lot. Now, if you have an overcast day and you're fishing on a lake, I use a lot of bone colored ones, the kind of that white. It doesn't
Dingy
have
white kind of.
yeah, bone, or kind of like that one I held up earlier, these type of colors. So
I've heard a lot of good things about the bone color. I really have. I've heard that's a good color.
Yeah, so bone, or just like a very like this would be considered opaque, right? You cannot see through it. So like an opaque white. That's what I'll use a lot on those cloudier days. So those are the ones that I use a lot, especially in lakes. Now, in a pond or in lakes, if I'm like up in a creek and I know those fish are probably feeding on bluegill, I'm going to use some sort of bluegill pattern. And the biggest thing with the bluegill pattern is that I just want a little bit of orange on it. It doesn't have to be a lot. I'm trying to work
a hint.
some lights, just a hint of orange on the belly. This is a little popper that I like to throw.
Yeah.
And you can see there's
just good pattern. I like the bluegill pattern on that.
Yeah, just a hint there of the orange. And some of them you'll have orange on this whole front side. But a little bluegill pattern like that, I mean, that's what the bass are eating, right? Is a bluegill pattern. Yeah. So I see that this can work. That's going to work well in ponds. It can work well in lakes as well. Now, there are certain parts of the country where certain types of colors are going to do well or prevail. For instance, in the Carolinas, just above you there, you have, you have the I totally lost my.
Are we talking about a bait fish?
Yeah, the ones that are in Hartwell.
Gizzards? Gizzard shad? No.
It's from the ocean. I can't believe it's just escaped me.
And I'm terrible with you got me.
It'll come to me.
It's all good. Take your time. No worries. I promise.
But in those areas, though, a chrome like this is one of the best colors.
Now it's like you almost got me wondering. I think I know what you're talking. Like when you say it, I'm going to be like, yes, because a
blueback herring. That's what it is.
A herring. Yeah. Yep.
So the blueback herring, they were supposedly came up the Savannah River chain. Mm-hmm. I've also heard that they were transplanted in some lakes by striper fishermen that were using them for bait fish for the stripers. Regardless, those bait. A blueback herring is a lot different than a shad. A blueback herring likes to be out in, over 80 foot of water, 50 foot, really deep water, but you catch fish on top waters fishing that deep in those type of lakes because those bass will just hang by those because the blueback to them is like a steak, apparently. Like they want a blueback more than anything. And so they will follow bluebacks all around these lakes.
Wow.
And the thing about it, though, is this chrome, when you're working a chrome bait on a sunny day, it will put a flash deep down in the water. And so that flash will actually, those bass will pick up on that flash and they'll come from 15, 20 foot down to come up and eat that. So in the Carolinas, if you're fishing around, any kind of blueback herring, that pure chrome color like that is a great color that, it's not a secret, but it's just something that a lot of guys use there. And then if you're fishing for smallmouth, drop my drink here. If you're fishing for smallmouth, something that has a hint, something that has a hint of chartreuse in it, is always good because smallmouth
it'll come out eventually. I was going to say, I'm sure you got like a bunch of them over there. That's such a struggle right there.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try.
No.
This is, you can see kind of the chartreuse here. It's a little bit of glitter chartreuse on the bottom. So, something like that for smallmouth, they really like. Something that's weird, but smallmouth like a lot is just straight black.
I was going to ask about black and, if it was a color at all that you had, that you liked or,
So I have a popper that I throw a lot, but even like this little spook style bait, like it's just straight black. Yeah. And I don't really get it. Like if you ever watch some of the Bassmaster Elite series, like they throw a lot of black marabou jigs for smallmouth. And so I don't know why they like it so much, but they do. And so like I guess there are some things in fishing that I feel like you don't always have to know why, as long as you know that it works.
That it worked right. I feel like that applies to a lot, not a lot, but when you're beginning fishing, especially, I guess, like the longer you fish, the more you want to learn as to why, I feel like. But when you first start fishing, it's just a matter of, I don't know why it works, but it does. So it's like, when you put somebody up for the first time on a pond, you're going to set them up with like a Texas rig or something. First time they ever throw it, you're going to throw something that they're going to be able to catch a fish on. And they don't necessarily know why. They just know that they're there to catch a fish, So that's kind of, it's good to know the why, though. I'm one of those nerds. I like to know why. But yeah, I was curious about the black color because like you said, they typically see the bottom of the top water, and I know that white and like a little bit of orange because of the bluegill. And I didn't know that about small. I think I may have not, like, are smallmouth in general known to like brighter colors?
Yeah, like even jerk baits, like they send to like chartreuses or bubble gums, like
Weird. Yeah.
they'll like those colors a lot. That's for sure. A black is also a good color just in low light conditions. Like if you're fishing on a super cloudy day, or even if it's first thing in the morning or at night or whatever, like black is something that I go with. I used to night fish all the time. And we would pond fish, and it would be me and my buddies. Like that's what we did on a Friday night.
Yeah.
We would go. We actually, and I don't recommend this. We snuck into a lot of ponds that we shouldn't have.
Yeah, it's not recommended. No.
Yeah, not recommended.
Not recommended.
But we would throw was a black, horny toad, a Zoom horny toad. That's all we would throw, and we would
weightless.
We would throw it weightless because you just reel it across the top, the surface, and just.
Yeah, that thing's cool.
You would just wait and listen for an explosion. All of a sudden you just hear,
that
cut the hook.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we did that a lot growing up. It was probably some of my best like memories of me and my buddies just
having a good time,
doing stupid things and having a good time. But
I feel like a weightless toad is just one of those things that it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy throwing a weightless toad. I think I didn't even really think about it. I was throwing it's the Explode Toad by Guggen. I was throwing it for like the first time over there on one of the local ponds, and I did it weightless. I had no idea the action that I had never thrown a plastic for soft plastic toad before. And when I saw that thing coming across the water, and when I threw it out, I let it drop just for a second, like, cause it was only in like a foot of water, and it scooped up a 4-pounder, and I was sold. I was like, oh, this is something else in the summertime. Like it's almost a good substitute for a topwater frog almost, especially if you're looking for frogs are weedless. I've said that before, but it's a good substitute. I feel like, especially on the more affordable end, cause you get a whole pack of toads.
Yeah. No, and I've seen it too, where a toad will get a bigger bite than a frog will. And the reason being is that a toad, most of the time, it buzzes past the fish quick. Right. So it makes them react. It's one of those fight or flight things. They have to decide in that moment,
do I want it or not?
This or not? You know, with a frog, they see it coming, they hear it, like they have plenty of time.
A lot of times they're chasing a frog.
Yeah, they're chasing, and so that frog or the toad that just zooms by them, like sometimes there's been days where I have literally like it is the difference between catching a big fish and just catching fish, because I remember I was fishing in Florida, and I actually did a video on this within the last month or two that I said toads are better than frogs. And the reason was that exactly. There was a day that I was out fishing in Florida where I was fishing kind of around the spawn, and I had caught some fish on a frog, like 1.5 2-pound fish. I mean, like good fish, but it was Florida. I know there was big ones in there.
Right.
And I picked up a toad, and this monster jacked this thing, like a 7-pounder, came up and busted the toad, but missed it. And I'm like, dang it. And I ended up picking up the frog, and I caught a couple more. And then I picked the toad back up, and I caught like a 4-pounder. And I'm like, oh, like this is what they want. Yeah. I was like, this is getting the females, the bigger ones, to react to this, where the other one was just catching the little males that were up there making beds and
just chasing stuff.
Yeah. So that's not always going to happen, but there just are days where you will get a bigger bite on a toad than you will.
Seems like it. Yeah, I mean, from my experience, I mean it, and I don't have like a lot of it, but I mean, like I said, one of my first fish on a toad was a 4-pound fish, and it was just kind of like that'll sell anybody. I feel like first time you're using something and you catch anything over 3, you're like, okay, this is a good bait, especially if you can keep repeating the process. But yeah, now is there any other thing? So I saw you when you picked up your lures earlier. I saw on some of them, they had like the little flare on there, like the little feathers and things like that. So is that, I mean, is the extra flare good? Do you think it really matters? Is that just something that comes on the bait and you keep it that way, or?
Yeah. So not all baits come with a feathered treble on them. I put a feathered treble though on almost all of them. And I do think it's that important at times.
Okay.
I think there are days that you will go out there and you'll fish and you might catch some fish on one that doesn't have a feathered treble on it, but sometimes it seems like they get it better because of the little feather treble that is on it, And so I think what happens a lot of times too, and again, this kind of, let me try to shake a bait free here.
It's okay. Just show like the half a dozen that have them all on there.
Yeah. But a lot of times, like if you're fishing, again, later in the summer when those fish are chasing around those little bait fish, like that treble just looks like a little tiny shad just by itself. So sometimes that is what allows a fish to kind of hone in on the bait, is just the feather itself, because they'll follow that bait as you're working it and they just see that feather going back and forth, and it kind of gives them a target to hit that bait.
Okay.
So I do throw trebles. Now, the big thing, kind of like what we talked about with rod selection, is also having good hooks on your bait. A lot, and this is, if you are just beginning in fishing, you don't always have to do this, but I do suggest anyone who's kind of got, their grip on fishing is start changing your treble hooks out pretty much on all your baits, because there's very few baits that come stock out of a package that have quality hooks on them. And I know that they may be sharp, they may be good, but a lot of times a lure company doesn't try to spend money on hooks. They try to get cheap hooks. So I use a lot of the Fusion 19 hooks, which are made by Berkley. They are a hook. It's a round bend hook that I like, and I put them on almost all my top waters. And the thing that I like about them is they don't bend out. They're a brittle hook. They're a very sharp hook, and they are one of the better hooks that I have used when it comes to fishing a topwater bait. And the best thing too about them is like they are at a lot. Like you can find them at Walmart, and we have a Meyer.
Yeah, I mean, Berkeley's everywhere. Berkeley's so established nowadays. You can find Berkeley just about, anywhere. If there's even a fishing section in a place, Berkeley's typically there somewhere, I feel like, almost. Yeah. Now, if let's say a bait says that it's hooked with Gamakatsu or with Mustad hooks, now, would those stock hooks be considered good, or even though they're that name brand, are they like, do you think the lesser of the quality? I don't know if that makes any sense. Like,
I know what you're saying. And
you know what I mean? Like, are they the lesser of the same brand, but they're like the cheaper end of that hook, brand?
they're the factory rejects.
Right. Ones that get tossed.
Yeah. So I do think, so I want to say that 6 Sense Lures puts like Mustad treble, like triple grips on their baits. And those are good quality hooks. So I shouldn't say all baits are that way, but a lot that you pick up don't have
majority
hook on
for sure. So, yeah.
Some of the new Berkley baits, I think most of them actually now are coming with their Berkley Fusion hooks on them, which is great, except for, I don't know why, but they put the EWG style hook on a lot of their baits, the ones that kind of bend in a little bit.
Yeah.
And I tend to like the round bend on
the more like, so you're talking, so it's like more like at an angle inside, like it comes in more kind of.
Yeah.
Is that, if I'm thinking correct?
So see how that hook kind of comes in?
Yeah.
Right there, like there's almost a little point. So that would be considered like an EWG style.
Right.
Hook.
Yeah, it comes in.
These hooks, if they hook a fish, they tend to hook them and keep them hooked
and stay.
well. But the thing is that if you have a bait that has, for instance, a round bend, you know, so you have this is just what your kind of your typical round bend. This tends to hook the fish that just kind of slap at the bait, you know, because that hook is like this instead
that
of
extra little space.
That extra little space sometimes will be the difference of kind of hooking that fish. So I tend to use a lot of round bends because fish will tend to slap at topwaters. You know, now on a crankbait, I actually prefer the EWG style hooks because a lot of times when you get bit on a crankbait, it's because you're digging on the bottom, you hit off the bottom, bam, that's when that fish gets it. So a lot of times they engulf.
They take the whole thing in.
So if they engulf it, I want that EWG because it's going to hook them and I know it's going to hold them.
Right.
So that's kind of my philosophy or reasoning that I do that. So
that makes sense. Yeah, I actually don't have, just in my lack of experience there. I feel like I've said that a lot. You know, when it comes to topwater, I wonder, I have to sit down one of these days and like do the thought process on where my least of experience is. And I feel like topwater and like treble hook lures in general, I have some experience, but I feel like treble hook lures kind of across the board, I don't have as much experience with. So like crankbaits, jerk baits, you know, and things like that. I want to get more experience. It's tough. I feel like I stray away from it because I just primarily fish from the bank. And so it's like, I'm always like, I'm going to get hooked up somewhere, you know? And so I'm always defaulting to a single hook or a frog or something that's weedless, you know, it's just kind of easier. And with pond fishing, it's a lot of the times you want to go finesse anyway. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, I mean, I guess you could throw a smaller crankbait or something like that, and they'd probably go after it considering the profile, like you've talked about with the whopper plopper and the smaller profile.
Yeah. So I totally like that makes sense because me growing up, like on the pond that I fished a lot of, you know, your wacky worms, your Texas rigs, your frog. You know, I did fish that a lot, but I remember like as I was really starting to learn different techniques, I would always bring that technique out to the pond that I lived on because I knew if I got something hung, I would just go out and swim and get it, you know, because that's the way that I was. You know,
yeah, you were more comfortable doing that.
Yeah, you know, if you're on a public pond, I can see you being like, yeah, you know, I'm not gonna.
If I don't have to.
Yeah,
but if it was my backyard pond, I'd probably swim to it too.
Yeah, but I remember so many times when I would pick up a non-traditional pond lure like a crankbait and go out there and fish it, I would catch a lot of fish because those fish just hadn't seen that style bait because a lot of pond fishermen are thinking the exact same thing. You know, so a lot of times in fishing, if you can just be different, that is what makes you catch more fish. Right. And I remember getting on a good square bill bite on the pond that I fished a lot. And it wasn't like, you wouldn't think to throw a square bill in this pond, but I would throw that square bill out and I would crank it down to its depth. And then like most ponds, like you're standing on the bank here and the bank's, you know, going out in the waters and angle. And as soon as I kind of felt like it was about to hit the bottom, I would slow that crankbait down. I would raise my rod tip and I would try to fish that crankbait up the slope, very slow. And I got on this bite that every time I would go from cranking it and I would kind of pause and then bring my rod up and start just cranking it slowly, bam, they hit it on that.
Like on that rise?
Right as soon as it went from going down to going up, that's when they hit it all. And I did that for years. Like I would always get on this bite and it was a fun little deal. It was like, it made you really have to pay attention to what you were doing with your rod and what your bait was doing because, you know, and there's times when I remember first doing it where I would like, because if I hit the bottom, you were going to get slime and muck and just nastiness and your bait was done. So it really made you pay attention where I'm like, I'm reeling it down and I'm like, all right, I know I'm getting close. Raise the rod, do that slow pull, and I'm just riding
into that sweet spot.
Oh, yeah. Dude, it was so much fun. Like
it's almost like you get a visual in your head as a bank fisherman, especially when you fish a pond multiple times. You almost have like a visual, like a map in your head
Oh
of what
yeah.
the bottom of that pond is because of how much you can honestly feel with different lures. You know what I mean? You
Mhm.
can run the bottom of a whole pond and you can almost feel what's going on in the bottom. You can feel the
Oh
brush
yeah.
piles, and especially if you know what you're feeling for, kind of thing. So
Yeah.
it's kind of it's interesting how much you can learn, like you said, from just doing it over and over and like learning, the technique. Because a lot of the times in pond, I guess with lakes too, I guess if you hit the bottom somewhere, you're likely to bring up some kind of slime or junk, or you get caught or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so I'm going to try to definitely get more confident in some treble hooks. I know that the topwater season's coming soon. That's going to be exciting. I'm excited to throw some more to just try it. Like I said, even though I'm on a pond, you make a very valid point. A lot of the fish don't know what that is. So maybe I'll get on a better bite this year just by taking the risk and just doing it. And I just need to do it. That's really what it boils down to. I just need to do it. I'll find the right spots. I'll find the places where you don't need to throw it. Just don't mind going through all the baits to take to get there.
Yeah. Well, I think that as fishermen, like, we just like to catch fish, like
Right.
we love that. But to like learn and grow, sometimes I feel like you have to sacrifice catching fish to learn and grow, because
Right.
like it's so easy to go out there, say you throw in your square bill, and you get hung in a log or you get it fouled up and you're like, I'm just going to go back to a Texas rig. But
Right.
it's like you already know that. You already understand. I know I can catch fish on a Texas rig or a wacky rig right now. So it's like, so in my mind, it's almost like, okay, so what's the point in actually throwing that? Because I'm just going to, the
You're
only
going to catch
point is to
them.
catch fish. So
Right.
like, why not try to do something a little bit different, and
Yeah.
just try to learn. The only problem with that is then by the end of the summer, you've tried 50 different things and you've caught bass on 50 different things. Now you're like, gosh, I need more rods.
It all works. Oh
It all
no.
works. Yeah. So,
Oh, well, is there anything else? Like I feel like we've gone over. I always try to go, towards the end, or well, towards the end. I don't even know if we're at the end, but I always try to get like the questions that I've asked. We talked about the rod, the reel, talked about the line. What pound braid? That was something I was curious. You talked about you had that 20-pound mono for your little leader. What pound braid is your comfort spot? Where's a good spot?
so I like 30
Oh
pound
yeah,
braid.
that's
So
lighter
that's,
than I thought. Why
yeah.
30?
So 30 is solely for casting distance.
Okay.
So, and I like, because with braided line, you typically have like a 4 carrier braid, which is a braided line made up of 4 smaller braided lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a 9 carrier braid, which is braided line that's made up of 9 separate braided lines or
Right.
whatever. So the thing with that is that you typically the lower the carrier braid, like a 4, the stronger that line actually is, but a little bit more taut that braid can be. So I actually will use like a 9. I think the braid that I have on this is a Berkeley X9, so it's a 9 carrier braid, and so that braid is very smooth, it's very supple, and you can get a big cast out of that braid. And I think if you step up to 40 or 50-pound braid, it restricts your casting distance, because
Okay.
you're going with a bigger braid in that case. And sometimes if you're throwing a heavy, spook style bait, it may not matter a whole lot, but I've never broken 30-pound braid. I have a ton of confidence. I have that rod that has that parabolic action. So I like to have that little bit lighter braid because I feel like I can really wing that thing out there. Now, if I am fishing those 2 lures, topwater lures that we talked about, which is a frog and a buzz bait, I
Mm.
will use probably at least 40-pound braid.
Okay.
Usually, because I have like a separate buzz bait rod and it has 40-pound braid on it, and I have a frog rod and it's got 50-pound braid on it.
I've heard with frog and 50 is kind of like the sweet spot with frogs. I mean, that makes sense. So it's like more or less with your treble hook kind of top waters, you're going with your 30 braid, 30-pound braid and your 20. You said, so why 20-pound mono? Is that just.
So the big thing, if you're using straight monofilament, you don't want to use 20-pound mono.
No.
So if you're using it, especially if you're using it on a spinning rod, because you're going to have a bad day. But if you're using on a bait caster, like you're fine with like a 12-pound or a 15-pound line. But with the really short leader there, the big thing I'm just trying to do is prevent that line from getting hooked on that treble. And the thicker line, the bigger diameter line, really allows you, like, because if you put 10-pound or 12-pound fluorocarbon or monofilament on there, you're still going to have that time with that hook or the line gets hung around that hook.
So is it because it weighs more, essentially, like the weight of it?
It's basically stiffer.
Yeah. Okay.
It's stiffer. So because it's stiffer, that line doesn't like get hung on that hook.
I got you. It stays out there like that. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
So that's probably the biggest reason. The other thing is I fish a popper a lot in the summer really fast, where I'm like, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1. So that usually that's my like cadence is like a 3.
I was just gonna say that's another good thing to bring up. I'm glad you brought it up. Like, what's the secret sauce to the cadence to catching fish?
Yeah. So I mean, really, especially with the popper, a lot of times poppers or topwaters in general, a lot comes down to the speed. Sometimes I think, people think of a popper as a very slow bait because you throw it out there, you pop it once, you let it sit, you pop it once, you let it sit. And there are days in ponds or if you have really still days where that works well. But, fishing around a lot of fish that are eating bait fish like shad or just little minnows like I do a lot of times those fish are fast, so I will work that topwater popper really fast as well. So, and
you're mimicking the hatch. I mean, that makes sense.
I'm mimicking them. And I think that sometimes you can give fish too good of a look at baits at times. If they get too good of a look, you want to speed things up to not give them too good of a look because, they will realize that's not real. Some places, some lakes, some ponds, some river systems that you fish, like the bass aren't going to care. It doesn't matter how you work it. It doesn't matter what you do. You cast it out, you're going to catch a fish just because they're in that mood that day.
Right.
So this kind of revolves around that probably 10 or 20% of the time where it does matter, where sometimes faster is way better and sometimes slower is way better. So it really comes down to just experimenting, and just kind of seeing what the bass like that day. But a general rule of thumb, like if it's really still conditions, that's when I'm a little bit slower.
Okay.
And if it's windier out and I want a little more commotion to get that fish's attention, that's when I'll have a little faster approach.
Okay. And just, this is me and the lack of knowledge there. So with whopper ploppers, okay, do they have any BBs in them, or are there silent ones, or is there a time and a place for both?
That's a good question for a whopper plopper. I actually don't know if it has BBs in it or not. I'm going to look right now.
I just, I'm like I said, that's the lack of, I don't know for sure. I don't hear any. Oh,
yeah, there's some in there.
There it is. Okay.
Hold the hooks, but
yeah, okay.
There are BBs now with a bait like this. I doubt they even hear the BBs because this thing on the back of it,
yeah,
it's so loud.
That's true. Yeah,
in the water, but for a whopper plopper, I don't think sound would matter a whole lot. But for a bait like a spook, so let me show you something.
Yeah.
So give me a minute.
Okay. If anybody doesn't understand the struggle, then you just grab a bunch of something with treble hooks and you understand the struggle.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a Strike King KVD Sexy Dog. So I'm going to try to get my mic here, but you can hear that one.
You can hear him.
So this is an Evergreen JT 115. It's a Japanese bait. And if you listen,
I don't hear any in that one.
Yeah, there's nothing in it.
Oh, okay. I was like, I don't hear anything. Is that what I'm supposed?
So there are days that having a loud top water is what you want in a spook, and days where the more natural, no BBs in it helps out a lot. And a lot of times comes down to the conditions. You know, if
Yeah.
it's windy out, I want something to draw that fish's attention. But if it's still out, you know, and I'm using a spook because it maybe mimics a shad that the bass are eating, like I want them to hear the noise of the water.
Yeah.
I don't want them to hear the BBs because sometimes that's too much.
And it'll scare them.
It's too unnatural. Yep. And it'll spook them. It'll scare them. But that natural action with no BBs in it is what draws them and will make them commit where they may not commit to a bait like this. So, you know, and I do think with a spook that matters. You know, with a whopper plopper, it's like they're going to eat the whopper plopper not because it's just bringing that thing in. So
okay, I mean that's good. I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't even know. I wasn't even sure how to like ask because like I said, I wasn't even sure if some of them had BBs. Or if they didn't have BBs. I wonder if they make whopper ploppers without BBs.
Yeah, they might. I really don't know.
Yeah, like because like you said, they more rely on the sound with the propeller part of it that the actual in the water. Yeah, I'm gonna have to use some of those this year. I actually have you heard of Do It Molds?
Oh yeah.
I've actually gotten and partnered up with them. What's up, Cam?
I gotta grab
something. Okay. Sorry, he just came in the garage. But I've gotten some blanks that are whopper ploppers, and I'm gonna actually put some airbrushing. We're gonna see what kind of airbrushing I can do, and we'll see what I can paint on one of those. That'll be fun. I've never really fished them, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, any other tips, tricks, something that'll get people on bigger bites this year coming up for Topwaters?
I don't think so. I think the big thing is just put it in your hand. You know, if you're not confident in it, you know, just put it in your hand and just go see what you can do with it. You know, because a topwater will get a bigger bite, and it's one of the funnest ways to catch them. But if you don't throw it, you just don't get confidence in it. You know, and so that is a big thing. You know, if you're a pond fisherman, you know, early in the mornings, late in the evenings, like those are better times for a topwater. But if you're fishing, for instance, a frog that's on underneath of a scum mat, like actually the best time to do that a lot of times is in the middle of the day, because that fish is actually sucked up underneath it scum, and you can throw that frog right over it, and it doesn't matter if it's sunny or not. They're going to come out there and crush it. So
okay.
So the big thing is just put it in your hand. Just get that top.
Oh, you froze on me again.
If you're not confident,
it like caught back up with you.
Yeah. But if you're not confident, just put it in your hand and just go from there.
That sounds, yeah. So, I mean, and there's been a couple of other talking tackles that I've done where it's kind of like, that's what you have to do a lot of the times to get real confident in something. It's just put it in your hand and then don't put it down, even when you want to. And you feel like, I know I can catch him on this. And it was like you said earlier, a lot of the times the goal is to catch fish. So like a lot of the times you're going to default back to what you know will catch the fish. But if you really want to get into something new, you really have to commit to just using that. So like I would even say, don't bring what your default is. Don't bring it, because if you don't bring it, then you can't use it.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. Really good tip.
But all right, Ty, we have been chit-chatting for, I want to say like an hour and 10 or 15 minutes, something like that. I really appreciate you joining me on the show. Like I said, it's really been a big honor for me because I have learned a lot from you, and I hope to do it again in the future. I'm actually hopefully going to start doing live maybe somewhere in June. If I start saying it, maybe then I'll have to actually commit to it because people will eventually hear it. So they're going to be wondering when live happens. But I'd love to have you on live. I'd love to have you, even if I don't go live, I'd love to have you again on here and we'll talk about something else. But like I said, can you think of anything else?
I think that's it. I think that's the big thing is, I think the big concept is anytime you want to learn a new technique, like you said, don't even bring your default. I think that's a really good tip that, if it's so easy for us to pick something up because we want to go out, we want to catch fish, we want to have fun. But if you really want to learn something, especially if it's a bait you just don't know anything about, like swim baits or topwater or whatever, just pick it up, because even in a day of throwing it, if you get one or two bites, you're going to learn a lot from those one or two bites. So I think that's really important, and that's really good information.
Definitely. All right, Ty. I appreciate it. Like I said, I'll be happy to have you again. If you want to join one time, I'll definitely let you know. I'll let you know when all this is posting too. I've actually finally caught up on like all my other pre-recordings. So it might not tomorrow, but it might be like the following Thursday after that. So I'll let you know. I appreciate you. And I guess I'll see you next time. Okay.
Yep. That sounds good. I appreciate it.
All right. I'll see you, Ty.
All right. See you, Jay.
All right, guys, I'm going to leave you there. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Tyler, I really appreciated it. I can't wait to do it again. I've learned so much from you. And when I start going live, I really want to have you on there. So thank you again. Thank you to everybody who's watched. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, turn on our notifications so you know when the next video drops. The Talkin Tackles are coming in hot, guys. Hopefully in June, we're going to be starting doing them live. Just got to get consistent with it. That's all it is. Make sure I got the time to do live. With a puppy and everything, it's a little crazy and hectic, so it's a lot easier to do pre-recordings. But anyway, you guys know how it goes. We're out here fishing. We're out here catching. And we are out here ready, even on a day after, or on the day of a storm. I don't even know. We're out here ready to go catch some bigs. No complaints.
Okay.
Kind of see through. So this bait, I'm not sure if you'll be able to see it on the work it.
Come off, come on, come on.
So like,
oh yeah, I can see your eyeball through it.
Yeah, there you go. So that'll
be a good thumbnail right there.
Yeah, there you go.